Hello to all of our viewers, and thanks so much for tuning in to our hangout tonight. My name is Liz Eggleston, and I work with Course Report, which is a resource for finding the coding bootcamp that's right for you. So if you haven't looked at Course Report yet, you can use our directory to find coding schools that fit your needs, and you can use our blog to find great interviews with students and instructors and founders at bootcamps across the world to really equip you with all the information that you need to make a good decision. So we've also started this great webinar series where we give you the opportunity to get some valuable information straight from the source and to ask questions that you might have for people who are in the bootcamp industry. And tonight we're joined by Jeff Casimir, and Jeff is a total coding bootcamp rock star. You could really say that he was one of the first to really enter the bootcamp space. He worked with Living Social to create the Hungry Academy, and then he founded gSchool with Galvanize, and now he's continuing the evolution of bootcamps with the Turing School in Colorado. And Jeff has trained thousands of aspiring software developers, so who better to really give us advice on how to shine at a coding bootcamp. Jeff also has asked a few students, Tyler and Ed and Dan and Bree, to share their experiences as well. So we're really happy to have them. I want to remind everyone that we're going to be doing a couple of Q&A sessions throughout the webinar. So please use the Q&A app that's on the side of your screen to send in any questions that you have, and we'll try to get to all of them. You can also tweet questions to @CourseReport, and we will grab some questions from there as well. So I am going to pass it over to Jeff and let him introduce himself and tell us about Turing and about being successful at coding bootcamps.
Hi. So yeah, thanks for having me, and thanks to people out there for listening to me talk to a computer for a little while here. So Liz and I talked about what would be interesting to discuss for people who are either considering joining us at Turing or coming to joining some other program. And now that through, as Liz said, we've done Hungry Academy, 2 classes of gSchool, and now Turing, we've had about 100 students in these intense programs, in addition to just over 1,000 students across other programs that we've run and so forth. So what I thought would be most valuable would be to discuss kind of tips for success, and there are a lot of I don't believe in just throwing down platitudes of work really hard, believe in what you're doing. That kind of stuff is a waste of time. So I started thinking about and writing down some concrete tips and things that people can do, and particularly ways to avoid problems, and maybe some that are surprising. So the first couple things I want to talk about are all about before a program starts. Different programs you'll see have created very different structures for what happens before your first day. For us, I don't believe that much in pre-work. I like to have our students do a little bit of work ahead of time, where I think probably Dev Bootcamp is at the other extreme, where students are in a 9-week pre-work thing that's facilitated by instructors and so forth. My feeling is you're signing up for the program to come learn here. If you wanted to learn online, you would sign up for a different program. And so I don't really believe in pre-work that much. But there are a few things that I ask people to work on ahead of time. And the first one is one of the dumbest is typing. And as Ed can tell you, in Hungry Academy one day, we had they were all getting fired up about something, and I go over to see what they're doing, and it's like some online typing race. I'm like, I can hang with this, no problem, I got this. And I believe, Ed, were you the champion? Yeah, Ed was the champion of typing. And typing fast is always useful, obviously, if you're using computers, but the thing about being a novice programmer is that you tend to make really small mistakes with a very high frequency. And when it comes to programming, right, one dropped parentheses, you're in trouble. The whole file's not going to compile, it's not going to run, etc. If you're looking at the keyboard and looking at your fingers, the chance that you miss some little symbol and don't notice it for a while are pretty high. And so one of the things I really strongly recommend is working on your typing, even if it's slow. As long as you don't have to look at the keys, you're a lot better off. And in fact, if you can pick between slow and looking at the screen versus fast and looking at the keys, pick the slow and looking at the screen, because you're going to catch those errors immediately after you make them, as opposed to trying to track them down when you go to run your code and nothing works. We recommend a service called typing.io. And they have a free program. They also have a paid program, which gives you a little bit more guidance and support. And the thing that's really cool about typing.io is, as opposed to something like a Mavis Beacon teaches typing or like a classic typing tutor, typing.io has you type code. And you can go on there and pick, oh, I want to type Ruby, I want to type Python, I want to type C#, whatever it is. And which code you pick, it doesn't matter. So if you're coming to a Ruby program like ours, you're probably going to jump into Ruby first, but then typing Python and so forth, you're using the same symbols that we use in Ruby, and so you're developing the same proficiency, even if it's not exactly what you're going to be doing in class. And all those symbols up above the numbers, I think that's where we see a lot of people like people are doing fine on typing, and then they're like, wait, what is ampersand? Where is that? So doing something like typing.io can really improve that. The second tip is kind of a general one about getting organized, and I think something we're still trying to figure out how to coach well and instruct well is how to get and be organized. One of the books that's most popular in the programming world is David Allen's Getting Things Done. And Getting Things Done, or GTD, very much prescribes a system for how to organize all the things you have to do and all that. And I don't personally subscribe to the system, and I don't think it's necessary for students to do that either. But the ideas behind the system are really valuable and important. I think particularly for people that are maybe coming right out of college or have had a job where they probably weren't the boss, right? Like if someone was telling you what to do, things like your email and keeping track of tasks, somebody else really managed that stuff for you, and they tell you what to do, and if you don't listen, then they tell you again, and so forth. People who are accustomed to running a small business or leading teams and so forth, you'll find that they have a lot stronger organizational skills because they have to, or else they would have failed at that job. Inboxes are terrible things, and it kind of drives me crazy when I look over a student's shoulder and I see like an email that I sent mixed in with their daily deals, no offense, Ed, and all these other email that just aren't relevant to what they're doing right now. And I, like a lot of developers, strive to have 0 emails in the inbox, right? Archiving things that are either done or don't need to be dealt with, and it's not always practical to keep up with that. But I think keeping organized is really a challenge for a lot of students, and everybody likes to think that they're organized, but typically in developer training programs like ours, students have 2 or 3 or 4 things that they're working on at a given time, and no one's managing that for you. No one's saying like, remember, tonight your homework is this, and tomorrow I'm going to check your assignment book. Like, you're grown-ups, and you need to be able to track that stuff yourself. And related to that is kind of attention management. So I'm surprised how many students invite inattention into their workday. So have running their Twitter client and IM client and messages and all this stuff. And what typically happens is I'm sitting down next to somebody to help them with some code, and I get distracted because it's like their mom is sending messages and their sister posted a photo on Facebook, and there's like stuff popping here and here and here and here. And software development, focus is really critical, and the cost of that context shift when something pops in, you're mentally stop what you're doing, unload that process, read the message, right, and then decide whether you have to do something, and then probably not, and then go back and reload what you're doing before, that's very expensive. And it's expensive, particularly if you start adding it up to 5-10 times an hour. You're losing a lot of brain power and productivity to those distractions. One of the small recommendations there is to investigate like iPhones and Android both have like privacy mode, for instance, where you can schedule it to like during the day, 9 to noon, don't send me push notifications and don't make sounds and all that stuff. And then at lunch, like go ahead and catch up on everything that was so critical that it needed a push alert, which it's never that critical. And then the last piece for prep ahead of class is if you're gonna do programming, and maybe that's reading a book, maybe that's working on exercises, I really encourage people to strive for clarity, not for breadth. If you try out 100 different things, you've provided yourself very little like actual skills that you can build on in the class. So a lot of students, we teach Ruby and then we build Rails, like use Rails on top of that. And students will come in and say like, oh, I was doing this Rails thing and da-da-da, and I pretty much just stop listening. Like, why would you do that to yourself? You don't know how to program. And in Rails, there's a million things going on at once. And there's a 0% chance that you're going to just pick it up and understand what's happening. You might learn how to type some Rails applications and how to make some fancy stuff happen. If that's your goal, then fine. Like if you're trying to prove to yourself, like programming is cool, I want to follow this scripted set of instructions and see something happen, then that can be neat. But if you're trying to become a developer, breadth at the initial stages is pretty much useless to you. And you're a lot better off focusing on building very small things where you can understand all or most of it. Things like Codecademy and Code School, I really like what they're building, but those are breadth exposure. They're not really developing skills. A textbook that I've used in the past is Chris Pine's Learn to Program. It's a little bit dated now, but for someone who wants to learn Ruby, it's a pretty good walkthrough, some increasing difficulty Ruby challenges. And there's also the Learn X the Hard Way series, so Learn Ruby the Hard Way or Learn Python the Hard Way, which also focuses more on a little bit more narrow practice. It's the hard way because it gives you very little support. It's pretty much like, go build this thing, good luck. And so it is genuinely hard. So then once you actually get into the program, a few different thoughts. So the first one is sleep. And in the technology world, there's a lot of romanticism around foregoing sleep, right? And how you should be staying up all night and you should be sleeping at the office. And Ed's probably laughing because of a student we had in Hungry Academy who slept at the office for no reason, just because he thought he didn't like walking to his apartment. So I would typically wake him up in the morning and be like, hey, it's time for warm up. So don't be that person. But somebody was saying to me the other day that when he was in Dev Bootcamp, he was he made a rule for himself that he needed to get at least 6 hours sleep. And I was like, yeah, that should be obvious. And I would push it even to 7 hours at least. Like, if you're not getting 7 hours of sleep, it's scientifically demonstrated that your brain can't synthesize what you're learning in the same way. And whatever you're spending that extra hour or two working on is not as valuable as making all your hours the next day more productive. Right? So if you sleep for 6 hours, there was a study that I think it was if you sleep less than 6 hours for 4 nights in a row, it's equivalent to staying up without sleep for an entire night, and that it takes your body 2 weeks to recover from. And so if you're not getting 7 hours of sleep a night at least, I think you're making a big mistake. The second one is what I call be your best self. And this one surprised me a little bit, where we saw students struggle, and we joke about it now. It's a serious issue around mental health. But I've had students tell me things like, at my old job, I hated it, and because I hated it, I was stressed out, and I was on these antidepressants or some kind of like mood-altering drug. And now that I quit that job, I don't need them anymore. And then you get 4 weeks into class, and it's like, hey, how you doing? You know, and the answer is not good, because it's more than just the job that led to things like having very serious prescriptions to manage yourself and your brain and your chemistry. If you're a person that exercises regularly, I think it's really important to keep exercising. If you do other things for your care to like be your best self, it's really important that you do them. In the same way of like sacrificing sleep, if you sacrifice those things, you're not going to be well prepared to learn, and you're going to be extra stressed. You're going to be distracted. You're not going to be as able to focus, and so it seems like you're fitting in more work time, but really you're destroying the other work time. You're sacrificing too much. So then once you enter the program, you need to think immediately about building a portfolio. I hear, you'll hear people in the industry talk about like GitHub is your resume, and there's truth to that, but it's not really true. One of the things we hear a lot is students afraid of putting code on GitHub because it's not good. And the reality is that 99% of developers don't put any code on GitHub. And so if you put up some code, you're already more interesting than a lot of other people. And there's a certain amount of like bravery in putting things up and saying, yeah, like I'm not that good yet, I'm not a professional, but I'm going to put it out there anyway. And that even sets you up to be able to show like your growth over time. So if you're posting your first assignments and you know they're crap, and then later you put up things that are half decent, you can show somebody like, look, I went from here to here, and give me another couple months or another couple weeks, whatever it is, working with you, and I'm going to keep that trajectory going. Having 1 or 2 projects on there when we get to the hiring stage and so forth, and I would, if I were hiring a developer and I went on their GitHub specifically and saw 2 projects on there, what that says to me is you only have this because you thought you should have 2 projects. You know, it's like joining Model UN on your like high school resume so you can get into some fancy college. Like you didn't like Model UN, you just did it because you wanted to put it on the resume. In the same way with GitHub, like you just put up these 2 projects for nothing. I would expect somebody who's thinks that they're a decent developer to have 8, 10, 12 projects up by the time they're applying for jobs, and that those projects should show some kind of ongoing commitment, not just like I made a thing, I posted it, I made another thing, I posted it to a different project, but here's a project I started, here's an initial commit, and then I worked on it some more and posted more commits and more commits and more commits. And even if it was only the course of a couple days or a week or something like that, show that you build projects and you care about them and you know how they evolve. Related to that, Jerry Seinfeld, in talking about becoming a comedian, he says that most comedians spend 10 years building up their first hour of stand-up material. And then the question after that is like, well, how do you build good material? And his answer is, I write jokes every day. And I think particularly when you're learning, it's important to write code, commit code, and post code every day. And so I have a goal for our students that their graph is almost entirely green on GitHub, that they're posting code publicly every day. Even if it's a small exercise, even if it's a trivial thing off of Project Euler, find the first 10 prime numbers or whatever it is, posting code regularly, or ideally every day, maybe every weekday if you want to take your weekends off, I think is extremely healthy and demonstrates like a real commitment to your craft. And then the third piece there is what I like to say, like the phrase I use is no permission to open source. There's a perception that getting into open source is very difficult. And the problem is that new developers have completely unrealistic expectations about the kinds of projects that they can contribute to. And when you look at like Ruby as a language, Python as a language, Rails, Django, etc., these are huge open source projects where thousands of people have contributed, hundreds of thousands of people or millions of people use them. And the chance of you having the expertise to write code, to post it and get it accepted is relatively small. If you want for kind of a vanity commit, you can usually edit or add some documentation and get that included. And it's pretty cool to have a commit accepted to Ruby or to Rails or whatever. But it's much more practical. If you want to do actual programming, you need to, and you want to do kind of traditional open source, you need to find a small project, a project that has 2-3 people working on it and hundreds of people using it. And the chance that you can actually help there is pretty high. That there are a lot, I have projects myself that I don't really have the time to maintain them. And if somebody were to come along and say like, hey, I took care of this issue, you know, this little bug, like things that are just sitting there in GitHub waiting to be solved, I would hugely appreciate that. And there are a lot of other developers that feel the same. But that's only one model of open source. You don't need anyone's permission to contribute to open source, right? To contribute to those projects, yes, you do. But if you're doing things like I mentioned Project Euler, exercises, if you're solving those exercises, post the solutions, create a repository, and post solutions on a daily basis. We've worked on a project called Exorcism. That's at Exorcism.io. That's a collection of about 100 programming challenges in 10 or 14 different languages. And for me, like I wanted to get better at JavaScript, and so I started what I called my 100 days of JavaScript, where I'd pull down an exercise and do a little bit of work on it and post it to GitHub every day and keep my graph of green going. Does anyone else care about that open source? Doesn't matter. You know, maybe some student is going to come along and they're searching for a solution to some certain problem at Exorcism, and they can find my solution and reference it. But maybe it's just mine, and it just kind of shows what I'm up to. And that's what I mean by you don't need anybody's permission. Like, just post what you're working on, and no one's going to come along and ridicule you or judge you for how crappy it is, because the people that would do that, the kinds of attitudes that would lead to that behavior, they're too chicken to post their own stuff. So, you know, just be bold, be brave, put your things out there. And that's my pause point for some questions.
Wonderful. Thank you, Jeff. Okay, we've got a few questions. All right, so Jeff, what do you think about live-in boot camps? Do you think that that's like helpful to have like a house where everyone lives and learns at the same time, or do you think that's harmful, or what's your?
Yeah, people. Several times I have people be like, "You should make a reality show." Like, this sounds terrible, and we don't need more reality shows. So, living in the same house, I don't know. I couldn't do it. Like, I need a little bit of space from people, and it also seems like even more like you're inviting an even smaller pool of the population, right? People that are happy to like leave their families or significant others or kids and pets and all that. So I personally wouldn't want to do it. I could see some of the appeal, and what it reminds me of is with our program, we have definitely seen that people who come from out of town have some advantage, that there aren't the distractions of those pets and those significant others and the kids and the friends kind of pulling you away. And that's pretty consistent, particularly as the program goes on. Like, in the early weeks and months, your friends and family, they all kind of like, oh, understand you're doing something serious. But then after 3-4 months, we see people kind of get pulled away into more things because the outside world doesn't really understand the level of commitment that you're trying to put in.
Definitely. So we had a question on Twitter that was actually like, do you think that JavaScript is the future? But I'm going to make that more broad and ask if you think that people should make a decision about like which boot camp to go to based on what language they teach. Mm-hmm. And also, do you think JavaScript is the future?
I think at some point we may switch over to teaching JavaScript. I think JavaScript has a very bright and important future, and it should probably be everyone's second programming language. I don't know if it should be the first. And there's always debate about which language should you learn. And the answer is, like, if you're going to actually learn a language, it doesn't matter too much which one it is. Because if you truly learn it and you understand what's happening and you understand the design patterns that go into it, you can convert that knowledge really quickly. So I'm super impressed with some of our students that have gone into jobs. We're doing Ruby, and a little bit of JavaScript, and then go into a job where they're doing full-time JavaScript, or go into a job where they're doing Objective-C. And it's not like they can show up day one and start writing iOS apps in Objective-C, but if you understand how to program in Ruby, you can pick up Objective-C in a couple weeks, and get functional with it. So I don't think it matters too much what a program that's teaching Python versus Ruby versus JavaScript. I think those are kind of the main three choices. .NET, I have some ethical issues with because I believe really strongly in open source software, and I wouldn't want to build a program and a career around closed source software, which the .NET platform essentially is. Technically, they're like open source variants and so forth, but realistically, it's a closed platform. And so if it were me, I would, or like someone I cared about, I would tell them to pick the program and the people that feels right more than the language. If you come out knowing Python or JavaScript or Ruby, there's plenty of jobs for all those things.
Okay, cool. Okay, we've got a question from Mike, and then let's introduce all of these other lovely people who are here with us. So he says, I can write code via ebooks and video tutorials, but I can't get to the point where I can write my own code. How can I climb over that huge wall?
Yeah, it is, and it's even more than a wall. I think of it as kind of like crossing the chasm for learning, where there's a huge divide between following tutorials and writing things on your own. And I think part of the problem is the expectations. So when you can't write and sell a book that shows people how to build tiny little exercises, you have to write a book saying, here, build a blog engine in 400 pages, and it's great. And then you get done with that, and like, now I'll build Yelp. And the problem is that you're not at all prepared to build something as complicated as Yelp. But your expectations have been set to that level because you just typed this huge blog engine and it worked, and that was cool. Now I want to build something else amazing and big. So I think the solution, which is like, it's kind of a non-solution, is to just try smaller problems. If you want to build big things, you have to work up to it. For us, we publish all of our curriculum open source, and so like you can check out tutorials.jumpstartlab.com, which we'll put in the notes or comments or whatever, and you can find all our projects in there. A project our students just finished today was to build the, did you ever play, Liz, the game Mastermind when you're a kid? It's like you set a secret code, and then you have to guess like how many yellows, how many greens, how many whites, how many blues.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah, and so we built that in Ruby. And for me, if I had to build it, it would take like 4 hours. For our new developers, they worked pretty dang hard for like 4 days, and they just barely got it done. And something like that is an approachable problem that you can actually succeed on, especially if you're only able to commit like nights and weekends to it.
For sure. And your students right now have been there for 4 days, right? They started on Monday.
No, they've been here 3 weeks now. 3 weeks.
Oh, 3 weeks. Oh, I'm sorry. I thought they were, sorry. Okay, awesome. Okay, so I'm going to unmute all of these other lovely people on the line. So Ed and Dan and Ty and Bree, if y'all want to introduce yourselves, tell us what you are up to these days.
Sure, I'll start. Hi, I'm Bree, and after graduating from Jeff's school, I started working with a product company in the healthcare industry called iTriage. And so currently, right now, I work with work with a group of about 50 developers, but we're divided into smaller teams of about anywhere between 6 to 10 people or so. My team has about 8, and right now we're working on re-architecting and rebuilding a pretty major database, and then we'll build out an API for that, and it's been really good so far.
Awesome. Dan, do you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. I graduated the first class at gSchool last July, and after that I did a couple short-term contract gigs and eventually landed a job at a qualitative research platform where I did a lot of work with Ruby and Rails, but also a ton of JavaScript, which was really cool.
Ed, do you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. My name is Ed Wang. Prior to enrolling in the Hungry Academy, which was the original Turing School, I worked in...
like the alpha version, basically.
The alpha version. I was Jeff's guinea pig.
Yeah.
I worked in investment banking on Wall Street, and now I am a full-time developer at Living Social working on their mobile web platform.
Amazing. Okay, and Tyler?
Yeah, my name is Tyler. I went to the second gSchool class with Bree, so we just finished in March. I'm currently working remotely for a company called RentPath, and yeah, doing a lot of Ruby Rails, but a lot of JavaScript as well. And just sort of echo what Jeff said about that earlier, like, I don't think the language you learn is that important. I think it's more of if you can learn how to learn and just be able to pick things up. So just to echo on that question a little bit.
Very cool. Jeff, do you want to lead a few questions for all of the graduates?
Yeah, so maybe start with Ed, since you've finished the longest to go now. You've been working for about 2 years. And what things did you feel like we missed in Hungry Academy, right? So for those that don't know, Hungry Academy was our first long-term program. It was 5 months from, I can't remember, I know it graduated in July. It must have been March to July of 2012. And were there things that you hit in your job that you're like, I've never seen this before, I have no idea what's going on?
No, not really. I was actually
that's too soft, Ed.
I was pretty surprised with how prepared I actually was once I finished the school. I felt like, you know, I could actually contribute to the team. I think one of the things that you really miss, if you want me to nitpick, is you don't really learn how to work on large teams. I think most of the projects that I was involved with were four or 5 person teams, and at Living Social, you know, our engineering organization is 150 people. And with that size, you know, comes some organizational challenges. So that's definitely something that you end up picking up on the job.
Yeah. Tyler, with RentPath, like you work from your kitchen or your couch. Does that mean that you're kind of just by yourself all the time, or are you still like tightly integrated with the team?
It's super tightly integrated. So we use like a virtual office, and we actually work in these things called pods. So there's 3 senior developers and then 2 juniors in our pod, and I pair program every day. So not necessarily like 100%. Like sometimes there'll be like, you know, like I'll be working with the senior dev, but he's also like a tech lead, so he's got to step out for meetings or whatever. So you know, I'll just grab a story off Pivotal and work on it, and you know, I definitely feel like I can do that, contribute a fair amount.
It's one of the pieces where, you know, one of the I guess we get some pushback. People are like, well, I could just read a book, or I could just do this online thing and learn all the same skills. But so much of what we teach is about how to be a part of a software team, not just a software developer, that I think our students, that's one of the parts that like really shines. So the students, when they get out, is they've worked through a lot of different projects in teams, and they've fought with team members, and they've worked with people who thought they were awesome and turned out they weren't that great, and they worked with people that thought they weren't great and turns out that they're awesome. Bree, like you have run a lot of teams in the past and worked on a lot of teams in different contexts. Was being a developer on a software team like similar to marketing teams and things like that, or like how did it differ?
I think the biggest difference, if we're going to use the marketing context, is you don't. I think when you work on other teams and other contexts, you may in fact spend a lot of time in meetings trying to make decisions. I think the real big shift is when you have to sit next to someone in front of a screen and actually build something, right? Build something concrete, see how it works, and bat kind of ideas around about, I don't know what that error means. Let's go figure it out. Let's research it together. So I think it's a lot more in depth. I think in other contexts, other environments, a lot of your working with people is about delegating. I'm going to do this piece, you're going to do that piece. And I would say with programming, it's much more, certainly pair programming and working with teams, more like we're in this together kind of all the way through, so it's just a lot closer knit.
Mm-hmm. It reminds me of some teams will use phrases. There are a couple different variants, but like one of them is code talks. And instead of like debate, what would be better? This would people like this? And I'm sure Ed knows well. Living Social, they do a ton of A/B testing, right? And let's, instead of having days and days of meetings about a feature, let's just build it and try it out with some people and see what happens. And it's kind of a nice practical focus of a lot of teams. Liz, did you have any more questions come in? Should I keep hammering them with questions?
I'm gonna unmute myself. So with I feel like there are a lot of staggered start dates now with some of the boot camps. Do you think that it's better to start a boot camp as soon as possible, or if there's an option, or do you think, or sort of give yourself more time? When you got into gSchool or Hungry Academy, did you wish that you could start immediately, or did you want to take time before that, I guess?
No opinions.
Either way. That's fine too.
I think for us on the organizing side, we're really excited about the potential of what's going to happen when we have multiple classes in session at different points of progress. What that means for student mentoring, students interacting with each other. And one of my frustrations maybe with things like gSchool in the past is if we were just running one class at a time, people who were on the fringe, we couldn't spend a lot of time addressing their needs. So Tyler, for instance, got into data structures and algorithms. And if you have 2 or 3 people who are into data structures, all you can afford to do is basically go try this thing or go read this book. But if you have 2 or 3 people per class and you have 4 classes going at once, now you got 10, 12, 15 people who are interested in this slightly more niche topic, and you can devote more time to them and more kind of instructional resources to them. So I'm really excited about what that means for us. The other part that's interesting on timing is somewhat of a surprise to me, but it makes sense in retrospect, is a lot of students choose to take time off after the program. And even for us, people are in class for 7 months now. Most of them have burned up all the savings that they have, and it's hard to go that long without a paycheck. But people still try and take off another 2 or 3 weeks because we work them pretty damn hard. And often people go into their jobs and we get feedback oh, I'm not very busy. Or my job is easier than class was, and that's how we want it, right? You should practice harder than you play. Better than getting into your job and being oh my God, it's impossible.
One thing that I would say just about the original question is that, when I first started learning how to code, I tried to do it on my own. And what I found was that it was incredibly difficult, right? So, I would I would try and look at code samples and not fully understand them. I would try and run through tutorials, but not absorb so much information. And I think, what Jeff was saying, how, there's strength in numbers. So I think when you're surrounded in an environment where, everybody is trying to learn as much programming as possible, some pretty amazing stuff happens. And, things just click better. I think you learn things faster, you pick up concepts faster. And I think you'd be surprised at how much more efficient it is to learn in a classroom environment than it is just trying to study on your own during weekends or nights.
Yeah, you reminded me also of another thing that we're trying with Turing. This is like our third version, so we get to change the rules again. But basically, somebody can apply at any time for any class in the future. We don't really have deadlines. Like right now, people are applying for the July class, and then people are applying for the September class. People apply, we evaluate them, we interview them, and if you're a fit, then you're fit whenever is good for you. So right now, we have people signed up for the September class and October class, and I think people are going to start signing up for like the January and February 2015 classes, just because that's what works for their schedule. And that has some downsides to us, because like people get really motivated by deadlines, right? Like if you make a deadline, you're going to get a spike of applications right at the deadline. But practically speaking, I don't want to just make up some arbitrary date because we can, right? Like if you're a fit, you're a fit, whether you want to come in October or January. Why should it matter to us? So I really encourage people, and obviously I'm biased because it helps me, but I encourage people, like, if it's something you want to do, just apply and get in, and then worry about when are you going to do it, when are you going to start, can you afford it, all those things.
Yeah.
The other thing, sorry, just to add really quick, along the lines a little bit of what Ed was saying, I think also important in having the group around you, which is very helpful, it's also dedicating yourself to a truly immersive experience. So, I mean, I think back to like my college classes, right? And I had a class on a Monday and a Wednesday, and that's when we met every week. For me personally, that would have been impossible with learning to code. Having, the majority of your day, all of your day, every day for a pretty long chunk of time made a huge difference for me, because prior to that, I was trying to do, to sort of learn on my own and even learn with some help maybe once or twice a week, and not being focused on code every single day for really long blocks. It was too hard to get up to speed quickly and really retain that knowledge. So I think kind of like learning a language, right? The best way would be to, be around people who speak the language all the time and do it consistently.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, we've got a question from Greg who says, can you get into programming in your 40s? And I know that all the faces up here are young, so but he says, I hear programming is a meritocracy. I hear programming is a meritocracy, but also that there is some age discrimination. Would anyone hire a junior dev in their 40s?
Yes to all those things. Is there age bias and discrimination in programming? 100% yes, there is. Is it prohibitive? No. So we've had students. Ed, is Conan your team lead now?
He is not my team lead, but he is a lead of a team.
Yeah, so like we had a student in Hungry Academy who was, I think, 40-ish, 41. We have a student now who's 42 or 43. It can definitely happen in your 40s, but I think there are some extra challenges when people go into the interview process. There are some prejudices, I think, particularly for men in their 40s. Like, are you going to be, difficult to work with? Are you going to have a problem where your team lead is 10, 15, 20 years younger than you? Are you going to be able to work in that kind of environment? And I think those are legitimate questions, just as they're legitimate for a 25-year-old who comes in thinking he's hot shit, right? So it can definitely happen, and I know our friends at Dev Bootcamp have been talking lately about how many like older students they have. So Are there issues? Yes. Are there people that have a bias against older junior developers? Yes. Can it be done? Yes.
Cool.
I think as one who is 38 and had a completely different, solid, lucrative career for over 10 years, it was a big decision, and I worried about that a lot. One of my classmates from school, I also work with him at iTriage, and he's a couple years, he's like 3-4 years older than me. And I think one of the interesting things about being in that age group and deciding to go this path is there are a lot of other things that you bring to the table, right? There are a lot of other, like, you have a lot of past experiences that can be really applicable in what you're doing in programming. So whether that be, creativity or working with a team, thinking about business rules and consumer needs differently. Whatever your past experience is, you can absolutely bring that to the table, and I think that's an asset. And the programming comes, quickly once you're open to learning.
Yeah, it reminds me of my brother-in-law does Ironman triathlons, and in the Ironman, the most successful triathletes are in their early, mid, and even late 30s, even though like the body has started to deteriorate to some extent. Like your grit is so much higher at that age that you're able to like muscle through, and that's kind of how I think about it with students who aren't in their 20s, in their 30s or 40s, is like, how to deal with hard situations, and you're not going to be like, oh, you gave me negative feedback, boo hoo hoo, right? Like, you've worked in you've worked with challenging people, you've done hard things. I don't have to keep on top of you to stay organized and all that. Like, you're a true grown-up, and to me, that's incredibly valuable.
Absolutely. We have an interesting question. What does the nonprofit status of Turing accomplish compared to other types of boot camps?
Tremendous headaches for me. That's the primary thing that it does so far. Okay, so I've been in education now my whole adult career, starting with Teach for America and going through teaching public school and Jumpstart Lab and all that. And we're in it for education. And as over the past couple years, as we did Hungry Academy and gSchool, now Turing, there are a lot of people who I'm just not so sure about their motivations. And you can do back of the envelope calculations and say, all right, if we can charge $15K for a class and get 20 people to come, and we run it for 10 weeks, and then we run 4 of those a year, like, you're talking about some serious money. And I don't care about that. And I wanted to make it clear to people that that's not our thing. If we were making money, we would lower tuition. So we're going to just get by. We're going to take in the minimum tuition we need to keep things rolling. And so, like, we're in a basement, and we have shelves from IKEA, not from Knoll and not from Herman Miller, because like that's a waste of money. And why would I take money from somebody who I'm telling to now be unemployed and then turn around and waste their money or pay it out to investors and all that stuff? So there are consequences for us. Like, it's been a lot of our business processes are a lot harder for being a nonprofit. We have like higher reporting standards and all that. I hope that as we demonstrate our success with Turing, that one day somebody like Google.org will say to us, like, hey, we love what you're doing. You should find more people of color who want to be developers, and here's $1 million to pay for their tuition. And that kind of stuff becomes a lot more possible with the nonprofit. So in the long run, I have my fingers crossed that it will mean for our students. For us as an organization, it means only negative, like more work, more challenge. I also, gSchool, our former program, they just announced a big investment today of $18 million. And I've been thinking about it a lot all day. And answering to investors is orthogonal to the needs of your students, right? Like they go opposite directions. If we had investors, or we wanted to attract investors, investors only put in money because they want it out, right? And technology investors, they want 10x returns. So how are you going, if you have an education program, how are you going to deliver 10x return? You're going to drive down costs, which means hiring more and more junior instructors or people that don't really know what they're doing, packing your classrooms with more people, or raise prices, raise revenue, right? And both those things are detrimental to the educational experience. So I don't want, not only are those not acceptable to me, but I just want to take them off the table. Like as a nonprofit, you can't have investors, so done. Like we never have to think about it, we don't have to talk about it.
Cool, that's awesome. Jeff, do you want to talk a little bit about, you've given us some good tips on like before the class and during the class, maybe, once you're finished with the class, with the boot camp?
Yeah.
What do you do?
The hiring piece is really interesting. It's one of the parts that I enjoy most. I think of it as like this human Sudoku puzzle of figuring out students, trying to figure out what kind of team is this person going to work on best, what kind of environment are they going to most succeed in, and trying to help them find that fit. I wish we could get students jobs, like deliver them on a buffet and like, here's all the jobs, just pick which one you want. That's not the case. Our typical students apply for 4 to 8 jobs. They interview for 3 to 6 of those, and they're offered 3 to 5 of them. So, or maybe 2 to 5 of them. I think that the hiring process, one of the things that surprises students is how different it is company to company, where some companies will go through the whole thing from like, we just got your resume to offer in 4 days. And other companies, it can be 6-8 weeks and interviews that drag on and on and on and on and on, and then you end up at a no. Like, really? Like, we had to go through 6 interviews, and I was out there for 3 days and all that to get to know. And so I think start early is something to really think about. But then another piece there is like building your network. So for us, like I'm privileged to have a pretty good network in the Ruby community and am able to leverage that for our students. But it's also up to students to start their own network, and you need to get out to meetups and you need to participate in the community wherever you can. Programming is an incredibly small world. And just about every place our students want to apply, they'll say like, oh, I want to go to this company, and like, I don't know anybody there. I never heard of it. Let me pull up their about page, or let me look them up on GitHub or whatever. And it's like, oh yeah, there's this person, this lady who I met at a meetup one time back in DC, and like, let me shoot her an email. And those connections are tremendously valuable to actually getting interviews. Students can do that on their own. Right, so like you don't need me. You can start attending the meetups in your area. You can, if there aren't meetups in your area, you can attend. There's a thing for Ruby, at least there's like a Ruby Hangout, which is a Google Hangout-based meetup that happens once a month and so forth. And just starting to connect with people outside your program before you need them. And the last kind of piece on that comes from the investment world, even though I was just bagging on investors. One of my friends posted a great tweet that was, if you want money, ask for advice. If you want advice, ask for money. And I think if you go around asking for jobs, you're not going to find a lot. But if you start talking to people about, hey, I'm looking for a mentor who can help me 1 hour a week for some pairing at a meetup, or just overall like trying to meet with people and get coffee and get advice on, I'm moving to this town, or I just moved to Chicago and I don't know anything about Chicago. Can I pick your brain about Chicago and what companies I should look at? The chances that those people are either going to want to like get you involved with their company, or even more likely, they want to introduce you to somebody, because then they get to win on both sides. Like then you kind of like them and owe them a favor because they helped you find a job, and the friend that they introduce you to, they get a +1 from them for finding a good person for that company. So it just it's like a win all around. If you're sending your resume to like hiring@company.com, you might as well throw it out the window because it's not going anywhere.
Yeah, definitely. Just from all of the other panelists, and I know you all have different experiences with like actually getting a job, but once your program was over, what do you think was like the most integral part of actually like landing that first job after it was over? Was it like something during the program? Was it something that you did after the program? What are your tips? And then we'll probably wrap it up after that.
I think one of the bigger things for me was knowing what I wanted and what I was looking for in a team, but not being too picky. I think coming out of this school, what you have to understand is that you are still very new to the programming career, and you are still a very junior programmer. And as such, you need to really seize and capitalize on good opportunities. And learn from them, and then maybe in your next job you can be a little more pickier and a little more pickier until you finally have that perfect job that you really, really want.
I think that's good advice. Anyone else want to share their secrets?
I'd say persistence, and not getting discouraged, I guess. And yeah, like Jeff said, companies were very different in how they did the process, but I mean, I guess also you have to know how to do a technical interview.
Yeah.
I had, every single interview, that's what it was. So, yeah, just be prepared for that, I guess. The key is communication in those, I guess. It's not really like, oh, can you build X? It's like, how do you think about the problem and how do you attack it?
I push students with technical. I think there's a lot of voodoo around technical interviews, and I think of it as very similar to standardized testing from my K-12 background. If you know math and you take a math standardized test, you're going to do pretty well. The best way to pass a technical interview is be good at programming. Now there's some practice to it, and maybe you're familiar with, you might do a little bit of purposeful study around technical interviews, but if you can code and you can work with people and you can sort out complex problems, you'll do well at technical interviews.
Awesome. Well, wonderful. Thank you, guys. And thanks so much for sort of joining us and for joining the Turing School for the webinar. Thanks so much to Jeff and Bree and Dan and Ed and Tyler. We can't thank you enough for being here. If the audience has any additional questions for Turing or for Jeff, I will send out contact info in an email after this. And also, if you're considering applying to Turing School, we have an exclusive scholarship for you. Just email turingscholarship@coursereport.com, and if you're accepted to Turing, you'll get $500 off your tuition, which is huge. If you have any questions about Course Report, please don't hesitate to reach out to me. We'll send out the recording of this webinar afterwards, so check your inboxes for that. And please visit coursereport.com and sign up for our email list, and you'll get all of our future webinars and interviews in your inbox each week. And I appreciate everyone being here, and we will see you at the next one.
Thanks.
Thank you.
All right.